Have you ever just looked around at the world and wondered why are some countries so incredibly rich while others are so poor? It's one of the biggest, most fundamental questions in all of economics. Well, today we're going to dive into the Nobel Prize-winning work of Douglas C. North. He argued that the answer isn't really about natural resources or even technology, but about the invisible rules that govern our lives. And what he found is that the quality of a country's rules is a way better predictor of its wealth than all its gold, oil, and diamonds put together.
All right, let's get right into it with a question that seems simple. Buying a cup of coffee, it's easy, right? You walk in, you hand over a few bucks, you get your coffee. You trust the cafe to make it, and they trust your money's real. But how do you blow that simple act of trust up to a national scale, to a system with millions, even billions of transactions between people who are total strangers? Now that is what we call the cooperation puzzle, and it's the key to absolutely everything. So North breaks this down with a little game theory. On the left, you see the conditions where cooperation is pretty easy. Think of a small village. You're dealing with the same few people over and over again. If you cheat someone, everyone's going to know about it. But a modern economy? That's the stuff on the right. It's a massive game with millions of players you'll never meet, and you almost never have all the information. In a world like that, how do you stop people from just, well, ripping each other off? The answer to that giant cooperation puzzle is North's big breakthrough idea: institutions. Now, I gotta be clear here. When he says institutions, he's not talking about big, fancy buildings like a bank or a courthouse. Nope. He's talking about something way more fundamental, way more powerful. So what are they exactly? Well, here's the official definition from his work. Institutions are the humanly devised constraints that structure our entire world. To put it simply, they're the rules of the game. They are the things we invent as humans to cut down on the chaos and uncertainty of life, which then lets us work together on a massive scale.
And here's where it gets really interesting. These rules, they basically come in two flavors. On one side, you've got the formal constraints. This is the stuff that's written down, it's official, constitutions, laws, property rights, you get the idea. But just as powerful, maybe even more so, are the informal constraints. These are the unwritten rules of society. The customs, the traditions, the codes of conduct that we all just kind of know and follow every single day.
And this quote right here, this is the absolute core of the entire argument. The rules a society has, they create its incentive structure. They signal what's profitable, what's rewarded, and what's punished. And that incentive structure, that's what sends an economy rocketing towards growth, or lets it get stuck in the mud of stagnation, or even sends it backwards into decline. In other words, the rules, they are destiny. Okay, so the theory is great and all, but what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, let's take a look. We're going to compare two very different historical markets that played by two totally different sets of rules. First up, we have the traditional bazaar, or souk. It's a type of market that's been around for thousands of years. Here, the rules are pretty simple. Your goal is to win each individual trade. And how do you do that? By haggling like your life depends on it, and by knowing more than the person you're trading with. You actually profit by making the exchange harder for the other person. There's zero incentive for anyone to try and build a better, more efficient system for everybody. Now, let's contrast that with what was bubbling up in early modern Europe. This was a totally different ballgame. Over here, merchants and bankers were inventing entirely new institutions, brand new rules, things like the Bill of Exchange, marine insurance, joint stock companies. And the goal of these rules wasn't to win a single deal. No. The goal was to lower the costs and the risks for everyone involved. They were building a system based on trust so that more trade, bigger trade, was even possible. So here's what it all boils down to. The incentives were polar opposites. In the souk, you get rich by being a better haggler, by outsmarting your opponent in a one-on-one battle. But in early modern Europe, you got rich by helping to create a more reliable, more trustworthy system for long-distance trade. One path leads to stagnation, the other leads to explosive economic growth. But this brings up a huge question. Once a society starts going down one of these paths, can it ever change course? And that brings us to another one of North's killer concepts, path dependence. The idea that history casts a very, very long shadow. Path dependence basically means that the choices we made yesterday, they constrain the choices we can make today. Once you put a set of rules, a set of institutions in place, it creates this powerful feedback loop. It becomes easier and more profitable to just keep doing things the same way, which just reinforces the path you're already on. Think of it like laying down railroad tracks. Once those tracks are set, the train's going to go where the tracks go. Ripping them up and starting over is incredibly difficult and expensive. And this table gives us the perfect, and I mean perfect, example of path dependence in action. Just compare the institutional seeds that were planted in the New World. In English North America, on the left, you had these rules of secure property rights and local political control. That led to what we call impersonal exchange, a system where you can trust strangers because the rules themselves are reliable. Now look to the right. Spanish Latin America was built on a totally different set of rules, centralized control designed to extract resources for the crown. This created a personalistic system based on who you know, not on fair rules for everyone. And those two different starting points led to centuries of divergence that we can still see today.
Okay, this is all fascinating history, but you might be sitting there thinking, all right, what does any of this have to do with me right now? Well, as it turns out, these invisible rules, this institutional architecture, they're more important today than they've ever been.
Take a look at this number, 45%. Let that sink in for a second. What on earth could that possibly represent?
Get this. Back in 1970, a staggering 45% of the entire U.S. gross national product came from what's called the transaction sector. That's the entire part of the economy that's not dedicated to making things, but to managing the exchange of things. We're talking bankers, lawyers, insurers, accountants, all the people whose job it is to reduce uncertainty and basically grease the wheels of cooperation. 100 years earlier, that number was only 25%.
So what's the point? The crucial point is this. A huge slice of a modern wealthy economy is really just the cost of maintaining the system of trust. Wealth isn't just about factories and technology. It's about having rules that are so good, so reliable, that we can afford to spend nearly half our entire economy just managing the incredibly complex cooperation that those rules make possible.
And this all leaves us with one final, massive question. North's work shows just how deeply our present is shaped by our past. So if a country's path is so locked in by its history, by its institutions, what does it really take to break free? What does it take to change direction for the better? That isn't just an academic puzzle. It is the defining challenge of our world.